Okay, and with that, I would like to welcome you all again to this super special Psych Creative session featuring none other than the wonderful Dr. Sarah Norton, who has been with us in Psych Creative ever since even 4 years ago. So Sarah's topic today is one that is on our minds, whether it is consciously or unconsciously, but her session will be about dreams, images, and creativity, opening to possibility in uncertain times. So it is a time of great uncertainty, one where we are encountering unprecedented levels of change and disruption. This change is both personal and collective. It is environmental, political, cultural, economic, and more. There is hardly an area of life that remains unaffected if you look deeply. And sometimes you don't even need to look too deeply in order to see that something is very wrong. This is not only a time of chaos, but an opening to possibility if we can take the time to see it. There are signs of this change all around us, especially in the realm of the climate crisis. The oceans are warming, the big ice is melting, coral is bleaching, forest fires are becoming more ferocious and frequent. The news headlines remind us of new challenges every day. Beyond the sign that there is ecological disruption occurring, these are all deeper symbols for the challenges we are facing today. The work of these tumultuous times seems to be one of waiting and deepening into the problems that we face. Rather than move fast and break things, we need to slow down and begin to heal. For Sarah, this move began to take shape as parallels were revealed through a personal experience echoed in our collective crisis. Slowly, our relationship began to grow with an image of Earth that spoke to all aspects of our time and expanded in this recent writing. Through dreams, active imagination, and the creative process, an opening to healing and possibility took shape. In this time together, we will look at a few passages from Sarah's new book. Here it is. Some enduring dream images, some of the artwork that sprang from these encounters, myths that called out, and more to discover where these expressions of deep knowing can find a place in our lives, even in the most difficult times. Whether you have a creative practice, record your dreams regularly or hardly ever, there are images that are open to these in-depth relationships. We will dig into how these images from dreams, artwork, nature, memory, current events, and or the imagination can become an opening to possibility, healing, creativity, and comfort even in the most uncertain and chaotic moments. So for those of you who don't know Sarah, Dr. Sarah D. Norton is an independent scholar who earned her MA and PhD in depth psychology with an emphasis in Jungian and archetypal psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. She completed her dissertation, Arctic Imaginings, Chasing Ice Through Jung's Liber Novus into the 21st Century, defending on Earth Day of 2020 in the early days of the pandemic. With a passion for intersectional environmentalism, grief work, dreams, and creativity, she writes about climate and current events from an archetypal perspective. Her new book, Climate Change, Environments of Uncertainty and Loss, Jung, Politics, and Culture, was just released from Routledge as part of their Focus series. A longtime dream worker, Sarah is an occasional dream group facilitator certified by the Hayden Institute and a member of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. She records her dreams as often as she can, often creates art from them, and loves sharing dreams with others. Sarah is the online education coordinator at the Richmond-based nonprofit, the Foundation for Family and Community Healing, editor of the publication The Rose in the World, which is currently on hiatus for restructuring, hoping to return soon, communications coordinator for the National Spirituality Conference, International Association for Jungian Studies member, and co-host of London Arts-Based Research Centre's Psych Creative, as well as an honorary board member. You can see more, including published articles and upcoming events at sdnortonphd.net. And with that, Sarah, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. That was too much. So I'm going to share my screen here, hopefully. And all right. So thank you so much for having me. It's interesting stepping into this side of things after having co-hosted for such a long time with so many amazing guests. So thank you for this, Rula. It's great. So my hope is to keep this under an hour and to allow plenty of time for any questions or comments afterwards. I'll be reading some passages from my book and adding some commentary along the way. So let's begin. There is certainly no lack of uncertainty in our world today, especially in this country, the United States. Every day, things seem less and less certain. Things that we once held as sacrosanct or undeniable are breaking apart at an unprecedented rate. Everywhere I look, there is chaos. Every time I turn on the news is a moment of grief in one of its many guises: anger, denial, bargaining. I feel these bubble to the surface. It gets harder and harder to imagine a way forward. The uncertainty is endless, and the possibilities that lie ahead daunting. Though it's different, I have waded in these waters before. The rising tide of the unknown lapping at my ankles, getting closer and closer to overwhelm. In our time, in terms of climate, we are facing mass extinction, depletion of biodiversity, deforestation, ocean acidification, food and water instability, sea level rise, ice melt, coral bleaching, various issues of pollution, from microplastics to air quality, and so much more. The difficulty of this is the ambiguity and complexity of it all. When confronted with the level of unpredictability that climate data brings, or with the everyday ambiguities around what the future may hold, we get a sense that something is missing. There's a loss or lack. This missing piece is a relevant source of data that science cannot measure currently. The upcoming weather patterns that only make sense after the season, or the sea ice levels that cannot officially be recognized as outliers until the yearly rates are told. All of this is felt as a loss. It's a unique loss of something in between. We may still have it, but at the same time, it's gone. The major quality of this class of loss, one that is not fully realized, is what Pauline Boss termed ambiguous. A loss that is both unclear and indeterminate. The uncertainty makes ambiguous loss the most distressful of all losses. Once one has experienced this type of loss, even for a brief time, they can understand why. There is a strange hanging on that never lets go, sometimes even long after the initial loss is resolved, one way or the other. I experienced this kind of loss for a distinct 7-week period when my mother fell into a coma after experiencing a brain aneurysm. In truth, the loss continued well past that initial period. Even more than a decade out, I still feel the pangs of uncertainty and grief for the mother I knew before. This is the strangest and most surreal experience. In those 7 weeks where she was shuffled from hospital to hospital, hooked up to various machines and evaluated constantly, there was no response detected. The doctors were baffled. My family was beside themselves, everyone clinging to a hope for something that may not come. Day after day, we waited. I performed all the necessary tasks, helping to run the family business, assisting when I could at the medical facilities, sending out updates to friends and family, eating, barely sleeping, on and on and on. I cannot imagine what it must be like for those whose loved ones are struggling with long-term illness or who have been missing for years or decades. Eventually, the doctors handling my mother's case decided to try a last-ditch surgery. Almost miraculously, for what is magic other than science we don't understand yet. She was awake and responsive. After 7 weeks in a coma and significant injury within her brain, she was different. Because of all that we had been through, I was different too, and our relationship was forever changed. The time of ambiguity while she was in the coma was the most acute. I wish I had found Boss's writing around then. Unfortunately, I didn't discover it until years later. Even so, I knew there was something unique about this time of loss, uncertainty, and ambiguity. I could never express it out loud. I would talk to people during the 7 weeks who were generally optimistic and hopeful around me. Those who weren't, I appreciated even more. I wanted to rail and cry and grieve, to share this loss with others, but no one was there. Honestly, I was afraid to let myself feel that uncertainty completely. I kept busy. That was my antidote. This is a valid coping mechanism, but it can't last forever. At some point, things have to come to a head. For me, it took quite a while and a bit of separation before I started to confront the uncertainty ahead. As the days went on, she moved from one facility to another. The first hospital where she was treated after her initial assessment became home for a few weeks. During that time, ironically, there was a clock outside of her window. It was a sort of clock tower in the hospital courtyard, but it was perpetually stuck at 6:30, with hands pointing up and down at once. What a potent symbol for that time. A clock stuck halfway through the hour, half up, half down. A perfect metaphor for that time of ambiguity. We finally moved from there to a rehab center closer to home, where friends and family could visit more readily. I was relieved to have others to share the load, to be there by her bedside, but the optimistic reports of her reacting to singing or stories or the like became worse to bear. It wasn't that I didn't believe that she would ever wake. I just knew the likelihood of when it happened, her being the mother I remembered, would be a distant memory. While others were holding on, I was trying to figure out where we were going, given all the possible outcomes. This split future was harder to hold on to. Indeed, the future is dark, and everything to come still needs to be done. The uncertainty and predictability are difficult to bear. This suggestion of an uncertain future, found in Jung's Black Books, holds this feeling of doom exemplified in that dark future, that presage of his soul. At times when the future felt like Jung described, I wished for a solid path forward, even if it was the worst outcome. This is the shadow of uncertainty. All the worst impulses win out. You rail and cry and scream and bargain. You deny and avoid and grieve. In the confrontation with these worst outcomes, I realized anything else would be a gift, and one not to be scoffed at. If she woke up, even if no piece of her was left that I recognized, there was still something to build from, to move forward with. The key here was I had to confront and accept the worst of the possibilities. Only then could I begin to imagine a way forward. This is where I began to come to terms with the parallels of my personal experience with the challenges that face us all today. I could see the path I was on, waiting, not knowing, various unsure futures ahead as a strange echo of the climate crisis. Lucky for me, I had a guide through, a strong image connected to the climate emergency, as well as a deep rooting in Jungian psychology and dream work to move me through. I am a long-time journal keeper, dream journal keeper. I have pages, journals, and digital notes on my phone full of dreams from over the years. Even though so much of this time had me wrapped up in waking life and with uninterrupted sleep, I only remembered a few dreams. Nevertheless, The pieces and dreams I remembered at that time gave me a strange comfort. Loss of this type, its ambiguity, requires a new kind of grief and a renewed hope to get to the other side. It also requires an acknowledgement of the situation we find ourselves in. More than scientifically precise answers, metaphors and symbols allow us to transcend the immediate situation and find meaning in our loss. Boss mentions this in regard to storytelling by those who are missing loved ones. For me, this came in dreams. For others, perhaps it's through therapy or activism. To find and tell a new story, or more importantly, in the face of climate chaos, to tell as many stories as we can about what the future could look like is key. Sociologist Peter Maris wrote that when confronted by a crisis, be it an individual, group, or society as a whole, it provokes a conflict between contradictory impulses to return to the past and to forget it altogether. This is where we seem to be with the climate issue. This is where stories can play a role. Rather than pretending it isn't happening or that we have years left to figure out a solution, or, on the flip side, ignoring the crisis completely, we need to imagine a way forward, to tell new stories. In my mother's case, my dreams were infinitely helpful in this way. In one, I dreamed that my mother was lying on a bed of light. The light was bright and comforting. It felt like pure love. As she lay there, I knew it was everyone who was thinking about her powering that healing light. She did not wake, but I knew that she was well. In another dream, she did wake, but she was like a child, joyous, naive, and full of potential. In a third, she was up and about, in a wheelchair, and somewhat delayed in her responses, but present and loving. We wheeled through hospital corridors, wondering what would happen next and who we might encounter. Each of these, in its own way, came to pass, and at the same time, none of them came true. This is the case with dreams. In my dream, there was a deeper truth that was coming forward. The dream come true scenario, no matter what happened, there was a path forward if we held the situation with love and a vision or light on the path ahead. Perhaps this is one of the greatest gifts of dreams and the imagination, as well as uncertainty. Maris noted that the confidence in the predictability of our surroundings rests not only on the accident of living, except in dreams, in a consistent world. Of course, dreams fall outside of a consistent world, but rather on our ability to abstract from particular events the underlying laws which govern them. Here he seems to say that there is a sort of conservative politics to our daily life. We gather information as we go through life. Just living life is a sort of consistent democratization of experience. In each encounter or observation adds its input to our lived experience. As life goes on and things stay relatively the same, we can rely on certain things to happen in a certain way. We become more and more conservative in our mindset. Maris mentions that a political view, conservatism, is an attempt to consolidate established norms of behaviors and behavior and principles which justify them. It is a condition of survival. Today, this can be a very literal situation. As the climate becomes more unstable, the things that fall outside of our usual patterns and behaviors can seem especially jarring. The more and more these strange occurrences accumulate, like a snowball rolling downhill, it can quickly become something we cannot run away from or avoid. For me, the dreams allowed me to go into some of those conservative impulses, imagine new routines, new relationships, and find whatever gifts might lie within. This became an important practice. Whenever I woke with a dream, I used it as an opening. Maybe not always in that moment or on that day, but I let the images live in my imagination to see where they would lead in the weeks and months that followed. As the doomsday clock ticks closer to midnight, this liminal space of uncertainty can become fertile ground for connection and understanding. If we can see our way through, embracing the looming darkness, this uncertainty can become a guiding light towards change. So that's the end of the first passage I wanted to share with you today. Though I won't read about it here, it was mentioned briefly, and so I wanted to share that the guiding image for me in this work was that of ice. You will see it throughout this presentation, and though it's not as prominent in the book as it was in my dissertation work, it is my constant companion throughout. I had a very deeply embodied moment with images of the melting ice that were shared with us in one of my classes at Pacifica, one with Professor Susan Rowland. Our guest was Robert Romanishin, and he had recently traveled to Antarctica, taken pictures, and compiled them into a short film with spoken word. He shared this with us, and I could feel the ice there with me. This was about a year before my mother's aneurysm. I had no idea what a guide and teacher ice would become. As I sat at my mother's bedside, I later realized that the ice had been preparing me for that difficult time. It taught me the value of waiting and not knowing. It opened a window of understanding, or perhaps a window to not knowing. It helped me to see the mystery and be less uncomfortable with the darkness. It also connected me to the many changes in our climate today. It was the first sign of the times that I could see, that I began to see the symbolic complexity within. In this little book, I try to do the same with other signs of climate chaos and the environmental movement. There are chapters exploring the interplay of complexity on the green of the climate movement, on melting ice, rising tides, forest fires, pollution, and bleaching coral. I dipped into dreams and artwork, Norse mythology, the myth of Medusa, two different tales surrounding the Greenlandic mother of the sea, Sedna, or skeleton woman. And there's a deep dive into the Arthurian legend of Gawain and the Green Knight, and a few short forays into the biblical story of Pentecost, the indigenous tale of beaver and fire, a ghost story, and Game of Thrones. It's a strange weaving that somehow finds a voice and a place for all of these in conversation with politics, policy, economic inequality, protest, and more. Throughout the writing, I picked up on many orphaned pieces from my dissertation work, but mostly I tried to feel into where the images themselves were leading. I picked a handful of images that I felt, though there's a lot of coverage and activism around them, were somehow being lost in their own conversation. I took this cue again from the ice. I remember seeing those pictures of polar bears on an iceberg in campaigns to save the Arctic. The ice was merely a backdrop, but in truth, it was the main focus of the story. The reason the polar bears are having such a difficult time is because of a loss of ice. Ice is how they get to food and mating grounds. It provides shelter to their prey and keeps the oceans accessible to so many species, humans included. Without ice, the whole ecosystem is thrown into chaos. So I wondered, how many other signs of climate distress are we dismissing? How many have a deeper story to tell? What can we learn from them? This is so often how writing starts for me, with a question and a connection. I feel into an image. It's not so conscious a process as active imagination, at least not at first. I feel or hear or see an image calling out. This often happens in dreams, but it also is a practice of noticing, paying attention to the small details in the news, on social media, noticing patterns and energy, a listening and a waiting. There is a lot of wandering as well. Writing in the way that I do often feels much more like a creative process than an academic one. Perhaps that's because I have a view to the aesthetic, being raised by two art majors who are very creative and crafty. But the process is almost like a weaving, or perhaps like the making of a collage. I tend to find resources and quotes that can be torn at the edges and then pieced back together with other similarly rent pieces. It becomes a kind of remembering, a putting back together the pieces that were meant to be. This too allows for many different perspectives to come together into one. There's a place for many disciplines. I dig into, as the title suggests, Jung, politics, and culture. It's a transdisciplinary approach. Only by bridging or breaching the boundaries of disciplines can there be any attempt at understanding such a complex and all-encompassing issue. I will not go as deeply into the area of loss today, as that was not inferred in the title of this talk, though that is obviously the second tier to the inquiry in the book. There is a lot of loss behind the pages. One thing I do want to note in regard to the writing and in this presentation is that because of the way I write, most of the chapters tend to fold into one another. So I have necessarily had to cut and paste from within the chapters to give everything a narrative that flows here today. There are pieces that were left to the side, that were lost in translation. One more note on uncertainty. I think it may bridge the gap in the next section I'd like to read, is that my husband is a disabled veteran with an invisible and difficult disability that puts him at a higher risk for many illnesses. I am his primary caregiver and the main source of connection to the outside world. As our society has become less and less concerned with disease mitigation, the more and more difficult and isolated our lives have become. We experience disdain from many out in the world as we try to keep him safe. However, we have grown to have a vibrant and loving community online of others in similar circumstances who are also having a very hard time now that their main means of keeping themselves from getting sick through masking is demonized. This is again the kind of possibility that comes from uncertainty and even loss. Mutual aid, community building, and care for everyone is a skill we have in spades. One that is also vital in the face of climate emergency and natural disasters. You will see these interconnected in the following passages. All that noted, I'd like to continue reading from chapter 1. The first two sections I read from had the headings waiting and wondering. And now we will move into wandering and wayfinding. I hope you will see a little more of how this collage comes into focus. I had a dream quite a number of years ago where I was in a wood-paneled room, quite dark. It had the feeling of an underground storehouse or something like a deckhand's quarters on an old pirate ship. As my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I noticed a table and figure there. There was a young woman leaning on the table, wearing a loosely draped garment that allowed her back to be fully exposed. Tattooed on her back was a map. The map seemed accurate, familiar, but it was also fantastic. There were monsters and magical beasts, realms that were hidden or unknown, all depicted in the midst of the familiar continents and labels. This is not so far outside of the experience of maps in waking life. Even with the advancements in satellite technology and scientific scans, there are places that are still unknown to us as a human species. Furthermore, there are things that one will encounter in any location that can be never shown navigationally. There will always be elements that come up out of the blue. This term seems fitting as it originally referred to the appearance of thunder or lightning out of a clear blue sky, an unexpected weather event. So many people in the world today conflate strange weather occurrences with climate. Climate change can certainly increase or intensify weather, but local weather, like a blizzard during a record-setting year of global heat, cannot accurately map the climate emergency and can often serve to confuse, conflate, or conceal the data. This can be especially important from a policy perspective, as those who do not live in an area that are dealing with the immediate or obvious effects of climate chaos may not be as motivated to address the greater issue. Their constituents may not be as motivated to call for the needed changes and progressive actions to effect a global initiative. Because the power to control uncertainty is very unequally distributed, the greatest burden of uncertainties tends to fall on the weakest, with the fewest resources to withstand it. This was certainly what we are seeing today in terms of so many uncertainties in our society, especially the environment. Of course, with the climate emergency, there are uncertainty monsters lurking around every corner. Even high-income countries need to work to improve equality within their policy. Environmental justice should be taken into account at all turns. There are people and communities who are being impacted disproportionately by pollution, lack of funds to mitigate or adapt to a changing climate, and inadequate access to healthcare and other resources that could help address some of the multiple effects that climate change will continue to bring. The COVID-19 pandemic is one example of this. A changing climate brings humans into contact with wildlife as habitats become less and less suited. The response was inequitable, and the uncertainty around it is fierce, even today. These are extremely complex issues from a scientific perspective. When you throw in political, cultural, economic, health, and psychological issues, it becomes even more so. The other reality of this is that none of these can be addressed alone. Just like the explorers of yore, we find ourselves upon terra incognita in multiple ways. Maps of antiquity show many aspects in common with that map I saw tattooed in my dream. Certainly, there were no actual dragons or kraken, but there were reefs and ice flows that may have been a threat beyond comprehension at that point in time. These maps were a good starting point. They allowed others to come after to create better versions and find more efficient methods. This is the same issue many in the sciences experience and have a challenging time explaining. There is an element of uncertainty that must be confronted. Like those mysterious and terrible places on the map, the uncertainty monster has to be confronted in public discourse. In their paper, Climate Science and the Uncertainty Monster, meteorologist and climatologist Peter Webster and Judith Curry start out by addressing a similar feeling. While extending the knowledge frontier often reduces uncertainty, it leads inevitably to a greater uncertainty as unanticipated complexities are discovered. There is a certain sense of an evolving map here, stretching frontiers and discovery. The more science discovers, the more things have a possibility to change. The more corners of the world humanity discovered, the more the maps evolved. With new data came new theories and knowledge. What is important is to remain humble in the face of this uncertainty, and to be as upfront as possible about what remains unsure. In working with dreams, I feel my capacity to hold uncertainty has grown. I can recognize certain patterns and know that there are common interpretations of images, but I also hold this lightly, knowing it's subject to change. As I change, many of my dream images have remained my companions. I look back at them now, from where I am in my life at this moment, and it's as if I'm seeing them from an entirely new perspective. In reading Jung's Red Book and Black Books, I feel the same. Though they were written over a century ago, the images remain incredibly alive and relevant in this era. Art seems to have a way of breaking through uncertainty by giving into it fully. A piece of art can be reinterpreted in myriad ways, just like a dream image. Whoever encounters it will see it differently. They will imagine a meaning that may or may not have been intended by the artist. Though the painting, story, poem, or sculpture will always be the same, each person will read the same words, encounter the same image. Everything outside of that is up to interpretation and imagination. Their uncertainty can be a lesson to us, even when confronting things that feel like they need to be more certain. In their paper, Curry and Webster conclude that integrity is to the uncertainty monster as garlic is to a vampire. They also cite recommendations from a talk given by statistician Sir David Spiegelhalter for dealing with uncertainty by using clear language to honestly communicate deeper uncertainties with due humility and without fear, and noting that for public confidence, trust is more important than certainty. Curry and Webster also note that, especially dealing with climate change, due to its elevated level of politicization, integrity is key. Note that their paper was written over a decade ago. In that time, the climate crisis has only become more evident and important, while it's become further politicized and polarized. The uncertainty monster must be brought into conscious awareness. Like a figure from a nightmare, it has to be confronted and brought into the light. Otherwise, its frightening power chases us all, unchecked and in a panic. To authentically and humbly discuss the possibilities, fears, and losses that accompany uncertainty can be a balm to the monster. When we encounter uncertainty, especially in areas that seem they should be more reliable, this can provoke extreme anxiety. Anxieties provoke blame, intolerance, and defensive exclusion, and create a volatile politics full of new uncertainties. This is a sort of political feedback loop. As uncertainty rises, political discord increases. This further amplifies the unreliability of the world surrounding us, and the loop continues over and over, intensifying with each return. Our defenses against this are serving to protect that conservative viewpoint mentioned earlier. There is something especially virulent in this view. The uncertainty beast was brought to light, especially in the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a pattern we can see in climate issues and so many others as well. In the United States, the idea of freedom is perpetuated very strongly, with freedom and justice for all, as the last line of the Pledge of Allegiance many Americans learned in school and continue to recite today at public or political gatherings. There is an inherently inegalitarian logic to the control of uncertainty, which constantly impels us towards a competitive struggle for autonomy, as each tried to protect their freedom of action while constraining others. Sadly, increasingly these days, people seem to believe that their freedoms are only available to them by taking the same away from others. In the case of coronavirus and other burgeoning infectious diseases, masking and other mitigation strategies were seen by many as an infringement on their rights and freedoms, rather than a reciprocal act of care for those most at risk of harm. We see this in other ways too. Political messaging plays this out over and over. If taxes are raised, it is not shown as a needed collective action towards a more functional and secure society, but rather a diminishment of personal spending power or autonomy. When there are moves to cut fossil fuel emissions, it is rarely shown as an opportunity to reduce harm to the global community, but rather that individuals will be denied their choice to drive what they want or cook on a gas-burning stove. On the deeper level, this all comes down to the uncertainty of these situations. No one wants to acknowledge that we are confronting a pandemic that killed millions, a virus that continues to maim and harm disproportionately, or that the possibility that they can be one of those affected. The same is true regarding climate. One of the main defensive reactions here can be to seek scapegoats, to turn inward and reinforce inequalities. When we are faced with uncertainty or ambiguity, it can seem so much easier to put our issues on some other group of people, part of the world, or individual. In this way, countries and political entities can say that they're doing what they can, but when an agreement isn't reached or goals go untouched, they place blame elsewhere. We need to see that there is room for improvement in all areas, and those with the most resources should work to redistribute to those who need it, rather than scapegoating them for a problem that they have very little to do with, but bear the brunt of the ill effects. With the ongoing threat of COVID, this could be expressed through masking, especially in healthcare settings, where those most at risk need the most protection, through funds for continued testing, vaccination, treatment, and research into the ongoing effects of long COVID. Further, better infrastructure funded on the community or national level to improve air quality and public spaces could keep us all safer from not only known, but the possibility of emerging novel and unknown future viruses, not to mention pollution. In my personal story and dreams, I hope to embody this. I have placed all of these aspirations in my backpack on this trail. As I move my way through these overlapping maps of Jung, politics, and culture, the best I can do is know that I will fall short. I will put forward these superimposed ideas with as much authenticity as I can. One of the most striking gifts I got from my dreams, as my mother was hospitalized, was the one that dreams and art can give us all, the ability to see from multiple perspectives. In many of these dreams, I was in multiple places at once, seeing myself interacting while watching others around. Even the most minor character in a dream is a part of my psyche, an aspect of myself. This same character is also the embodiment of an other that I may or may not know in waking life. They hold characteristics of others out in the world today, experiencing things that I may never come into contact with outside of the dreamscape. I do not dismiss these pieces of myself or society. Rather, I lean into them. I wonder who they are and what things are like from where they stand. I wander into that space, put on their shoes, view the world from their perspective. This is the gift of empathy that dreams allow each of us. In Figure 1, my North Star is seen from a dream within the aperture lens of a camera. It reminds me that this is one perspective, that though my perspective is mine alone, it is, in its way, representative of others, each of us connected by our uniqueness. Navigating towards this North Star, one of care and understanding, I find my way into a place where I can set my own comforts and freedoms aside to imagine how I can best be in service to those who I may never meet, but who I can imagine with compassion, empathy, and love. Finally, I wait. I wait for a day when others see things this way too. In this waiting, I find the way forward is not passive, but incredibly active. Just like the North Star that stands still, everything else continues to move around it. Even in times of waiting, there is movement if we can expand our perspective. We can only see a glacier move by waiting or tracking its retreat from year to year or decade to decade. Coral only spawns once a year under the most ideal conditions. The other 11 months, they wait and grow. For the pyrophyte, a type of seed, it waits to burn before it can break free from its shell and grow. For each of us, wherever we are, this waiting can be more or less active. For those on the front lines, the waiting can be frustrating and too long in coming. This waiting must find moments of radical rest to prevent burnout. Waiting holds despair and hope, loss and gain, forward and backward, like a rising tide. In tackling these complex, chaotic, ambiguous, and uncertain moments, to wait is to hold space for all the possibilities, the worst and the best, and to find a way to move forward. To hold space to give all the voices time to speak, to wait into the unknown, hear the stories that need to be told, and imagine new tales to meet the world anew. So I hope this has piqued your interest in not only the book, but how you might imagine into this space of uncertainty. I have to say it's not a panacea, but it has been helpful in its own way. This way of looking at the world, connecting with images and dreams, does not make the uncertainty disappear. I've had many days where the uncertainty is too much. However, it continues to be an opening to empathy and gratitude. And it's the path of creativity in its own strange way.
Thank you
And
so much, Sarah.
you know,
This is oh, you're
I just
still,
wanted to, no, I just wanted to end with this one last quote from
please
you
do.
that I just
Sorry.
love.
Sorry.
That is not in the red book, but it was in the black books. And again, this is sort of, it comes from a place of loss that it wasn't included. So what is uncertain is uncertain. The only certainty is that you create. And that was what Jung heard from his psyche in one of their conversations, or from his soul, excuse me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. This is beautiful beyond words. It is so touching, so intelligent. I mean, it combines everything that the world needs right now. And thank you so much for expressing, for articulating the frustration, the darkness, and at the same time for showing its womb-like quality, how it holds a space for waiting, for despair, and also for hope. So just as in everything that you do, Sarah, this is a beautiful message of hope, very creative and very spiritual. So thank you.
Thank you.
And would you like us to jump into the Q&A immediately, or would you like to take a little break in the beginning?
I'm happy to do, however. I'm fine to continue if we want to.
All right, so we will invite you all for questions and comments. Feel free to just jump in and speak. And if you're more comfortable, write it in the chat box. Oh, Susan.
Um, I'm so impressed, Sarah, and so nourished by your work here. Um, my feeling throughout of it was that you have become a wise woman. Not just that you are wise, which I think you've probably been for some time, but that you've become a wise woman, one of those elders that we need. And just in that very last quote by Jung, we have that wonderful ambiguity. The only certainty is that we create, the only certainty we have is that which we have created, but also the only certainty in humanity is that we create, that we are creative. And I just wanted to thank you for ending in that beautiful way. So,
Yeah.
Indeed, this is so beautiful. Also to see the certainty in creativity. Although creativity is all about the element of surprise, it's all about trusting the process and seeing where it leads you to. But in itself, by nature, it is a very certain thing that we create. Um, so any other questions? Gottfried?
I don't have a question. I just have a profound appreciation for what you have shared with us and your the arc of what you were presenting from the most intimate and personal issues concerning your mother to the global concern is absolutely breathtaking. So I'm without words. I can only say thank you very, 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 very much. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you, Gottfried.
There is so much wisdom and empathy in bringing out a personal experience into the whole global, universal perspective. So, and this reminds us that we are all, in a way, a microcosm. Everything that happens to us is happening to the planet. Everything that happens to the planet happens to us as well. And what your personal experience with your mom taught you, Sarah, and that was in 2020, I believe, right?
It was her experience was actually in 2013, so it's been even
Okay.
longer.
So
Yeah.
it was before the pandemic. So it was, in a way, I mean, you were able to hold this space of waiting and hope, although, it was a very dark phase in your life. Before, all kinds of global polycrises hit at the same time. So did it feel similar during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic? Did you feel that you were reliving parts of the experience, or at least you were carrying with you some of the lessons and some of the waiting skills that you learned during your mom's coma?
Yeah, I think also just the experience with her and then seeing the parallels in the climate crisis and then seeing the parallels from both in the pandemic just really wove a lot of things together. And for people in my situation with my husband's status, we're still in the pandemic. Like it's still very much pandemic living that we're still waiting for. So I am still very much practicing that waiting and that being in that space of uncertainty all the time. And I don't know if I'm ever fully prepared for it, but I recognize it more when I'm in it.
So do you see any resonances of Jung's idea of the Nikia or the katabasis, the descent of the soul into the darkness, only to re-emerge at some point?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that, yeah, all through her, again, it's not one of those things I sort of recognized at the time. I knew it was a really significant event, really difficult and uh, really, depressing. I don't know, all the things that you could put on it during that time with her. It was really only later that I saw how deeply I was in that dark space. And it really was a dark night of the soul that I had in many ways put to the side just to get through, everything with her. And once she was on the path to recovery, I fell apart.
Uh-huh.
And that was what had to happen, because I had to get through it, and then I had to look back on it and really take it in and everything that had happened. And in that way, we actually did hit an end point to her experience. I mean, she came out of the coma, she moved forward. She is very well today. She's still not exactly how she was before, but she's doing really, really great. And, so there's sort of this endpoint there to that I don't feel when looking at climate issues and things like that, where it's still very much that waiting, not knowing. Again, with the pandemic too, it's just sort of still very much sitting in it in the space of ambiguous loss. And but there are gifts here. They're hard to find, but they're there.
Gottfried. Yes,
Yeah.
Gottfried, please go ahead.
Sorry, it's me again, Sarah. It's almost, I mean, the way you speak, uh, you are sharing a miracle in terms of your mother. And
Mhm.
what if, dare I say, with all respect, could there be an aspect of a prophecy? I mean, prophesizing that the miracle that, uh, as miracles do, totally unexpectedly, I can only imagine, happened with your mother. What if we can have hope for the global and larger issues as well?
Yeah. Well, and I think that experience gave me a lot in the realm of hope. It's not the same, it's not the kind of hope that I think we often think of as sort of a return to everything that had been. It's more of a totally new and different kind of a hope that I think, even in terms of the climate crisis, we'll get through to the other side. At some point. It may not even be in my lifetime, and it may not, humanity probably won't look like it does now in any realm or respect. But to make it somewhere down the road, and that in and of itself has been a really healing lesson, and it helps me to let go of expectations and really be able to see that there are possibilities beyond anything that I could have imagined, that could be on the horizon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sarah, I love how you connect the theme of waiting to everything nature, because we wait, the world waits, nature waits. And as you said, waiting is active. And, in waiting, we must all find ways of radical rest. It holds both despair and hope. And it is also to wait is also to hold the space for possibilities. So I love how it's almost maybe not instinctual, but it is probably something that we need to practice more. And it is also probably a space for us to listen to our dreams. So, do you find that during periods of waiting, your dreams either become more vivid or you pay more attention to them or you start recording them? So, I mean, from my personal experience, I've had a few dreams that have saved lives, and they all happened in times of waiting, in times of darkness, in times of frustration. But I found myself listening to dreams or actually paying more attention to the dream images because maybe, we had, this inner hope that sort of guides you into looking for symbols and things that will tell you what's going to happen or what you need to do. So, is there this connection between nature's way of making us wait and at the same time, um, us being more not susceptible to dreaming, but more, better listeners and viewers of our dreams?
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast. I've had times, like I said, during the whole experience with my mother, I only remembered a few dreams. There were really 3 or 4 throughout that whole
Mm-hmm.
time. Because there was just so much going on. I know I was dreaming throughout, but actually remembering them was
Mm-hmm.
was a different challenge altogether. Um, and those really stuck with me, I think, because they were so poignant and they were also fairly short, so I could really pick up on them, when I woke up. And a lot of the experience that I've had most recently, what's been really fascinating is that I haven't had as active dream time at night, but I've had dreams come back to me that I've
Mm-hmm.
remembered from years and years ago that I had never thought about again. And all of a sudden they just sort of pop into my consciousness and it just opens a whole door to,
Wow.
to creativity, it's, spurred a lot of my writing. Some of the pieces from that dream with the woman and the pirate ship with the map on her back, I had that probably in the early 2000s. And when I
Mm.
started writing and really getting into the space of all of these different topics, it came pouring back. I could remember every detail of it, and I hadn't thought of it in years. So I feel like there's definitely in that place of waiting and opening an opportunity for that unconscious to reach out and to really be active and vocal in the form of those images, and whether they're new dreams or old dreams coming back to say hello.
Mm.
So
It's very interesting having old dreams come back.
yeah.
Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca, you're still muted.
There, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yes, thank you so much for that marvelous presentation. And I was reflecting, of course, upon the last segment that you did when you were talking about waiting and holding space. And then it occurred to me what an incredible parallel it was between the sharing of your experience of caring for your mother during that dark period, and then the experience that we're all having in this dark period of caring for our mother, the earth. And as we are children of the earth, and your beautiful way of expressing our need to be patient, to stay open to all possibilities, and the uncertainty of really not knowing how these calamities will be solved or what will happen. But perhaps the fact that we can remain calm and open will actually lend that kind of positive energy that is needed.
Thank you. Yeah. That was very much, I mean, my experience when I looked back on everything to see the parallels of the mother and the mother, you know.
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
that really fueled a lot of my research into climate. I've always been sort of climate minded anyway, you know, anyway, a long time activist and things like that. But really sitting into that space of feeling this personal experience run so parallel with what was going on in the larger world was really unique and eye-opening.
Sarah, how do you see the role of course, ma maternal mythology, you want to call it, or goddess mythology, and other forms of indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological wisdom? How do you see their roles in perhaps shaping more sustainable policies?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of pieces in the book that sort of dip into that. But the whole introduction is all about the most recent COP, the Conference of the Parties, so the
Yep.
sort of worldwide negotiation of how we're going to handle climate policy. And
Mhm.
there was so much in those talks that we're ignoring
Yeah.
indigenous knowledge and the people who are most affected by so many of these things. It was kind of heartbreaking to watch, honestly. And so I did start digging into that space. So I talk a little bit about the mythology of the North Star and different indigenous cultures, as well as the fire, the creation, sort of the story of how fire came to be, which is really fascinating, but can show us so much of how there was this really innate scientific understanding that we wouldn't call it that now, but that they knew and passed down through the stories which types of wood would burn best in fires, things like this. You know, so there's so much there that was passed down for such a long time from that kind of space of being so close with the earth and the patterns and everything else that we so take for granted now, that are still held in those mythologies and by the people who still venerate them and pass them on. And there was also a really fascinating ghost story that I came across that was a tribe or a group of people in Indonesia who are sort of nomadic seafarers, and they had this ghost story that you shouldn't, you don't go into this part of the ocean because there are ghosts there and it's bad, you don't want to be there. And when some modern day, tourist came and went on the tour, they got really intrigued by this and went to a friend of theirs who was a oceanographer, and they were looking at the maps of the ocean, and right in those same places is where the coral reefs were up so high that they would take your boat down, if you weren't careful. So there are all these ways that I think we can really dig into these parts that are so put to the side
Yeah.
that
I
really
mean,
should
just
be
look at
brought to the
that. How
forefront.
much wisdom and how much science, as you called it in the beginning, there is in indigenous knowledge and in mythology, and it's been there for thousands of years, maybe. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, I think what your book, the sense that we got from your book and from your wonderful talk today is that there's so much that we still need to pay attention to, not just for our salvation, but for that of the world as well. Um, we we need strengthening tools. So we need tools that help us wait. We need tools that help us prioritize and realize what's important, and also, realize that with the darkness, also possibilities are there. And thank you for being one of those amazing light bearers, Sarah, for making us see, for making us look where people don't usually look, and for presenting it so beautifully and so creatively.
Thank you.
And we have one question in the chat box, actually, by Rakahari. Rakahari says, hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. One query, do you think that the space of uncertainty also functions by resisting us from aspects of getting misled in our search or discovery of the horrible creatively?
Sorry, I was trying to read the question again. I mean, I think one of the biggest gifts for me of uncertainty is that it opens up so many pathways. And certainly many of those can be horrible.
Right.
But it's that we can also see all of the different ways. And I think science has suffered on occasion from a lack of imagination, in that they don't remember or imagine all the terrible things that can come out of creative inventions and technologies and things like this. So with a greater eye towards all of those different areas and the ways that they can be misunderstood and misconstrued and misused, my hope would be that if we can have that wider perspective, that we can avoid some of those pitfalls and hopefully do our best with what we have. And, you know, and the thing with it too is that so many things grow and change over time and with data being collected and everything else. So, that wider perspective and that capacity for imagination, I think would be the best path forward to avoid as much of that horrible, you know, the discovery of the horrible.
And this is also what one of the most important scientists said. Albert Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge because knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world. And he also mentions that this is what gives birth to evolution. So yes, Sarah, I love what you said about science lacking imagination, which is very misleading. So Ray.
Thank you, Sarah, for a great talk. It's just a couple of things. It seems to me that part of the climate change denial is a refusal to believe in uncertainty and a refusal to even consider the fact that things could change and things could change for the worse. So seemingly to me, the experience with your mother reinforces the fact that you went through a personal experience where you know that one day life is this way and then the next day totally changed. 31 years ago, my mom passed on after 2 years of helplessness and unconsciousness after she received radiation treatments for brain cancer. And we kept her at home. We had nursing care 21 hours a day, but there was a 3 hour gap in the evenings. And my father was still alive and he was just so stressed out. So after work, I went and sat with my mom 3 hours, 5 nights a week. And certainly it was a lesson in uncertainty. You had no idea what was going to happen. But it was also probably one of the most meaningful times that I spent with my mother in my whole life. Sometimes she would sleep the whole time. Sometimes she would be half awake. Sometimes she would wake up and be totally cogent and consciousness, and we would have these incredible talks. And my brother could not face up to the could not face up to what was happening to my mother, and he never came to see her in those 2 years. And yet my mother, often the first thing my mother would say to me when I walked in the room at night was, "Is your brother coming tonight?" So one of the most touching things for me in this time of uncertainty was the one certain thing was this flow of feeling of love between my mother and myself. And even though it was a dark time in certain ways, in which many of the nights I would leave the house crying, it was also probably the most meaningful time in my life. So your talk brought all that back to me, and
Oh,
it's very important facing up to the uncertainties that we will all have in our lives. And I have a couple of things to say about poetry, but I'll do that. Uncertainty in poetry, I'll do that later when we read some poems. Thank you
oh,
so much for the presentation.
thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And we have a recommendation from Molly in the chat box. So Molly highly recommends Maggie Jackson's book, Uncertain. She describes it, uncertainty, I guess, as a valuable resource. So thank you, Molly. It looks like an amazing book.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that one. I'm not familiar.
And once again, thank you, Sarah, for this beautiful and incredible talk. Oh, and I see Kirsty's hand up. Would you want to take one more question, Sarah? All
Yeah.
right, Kirsty, hello.
Hi, hey, hello. Sorry, I was late. I missed the beginning. I will catch up with it. It's actually just another book recommendation based on what Raymond was saying as well. I've just finished reading, I don't know if you've heard of it, Sharon Blackie, Haggitude. And going back to what
Yes.
Susan was saying about the wise old woman archetype, it's all around that and this kind of coming into her own power and things and the feminine. But as she finishes it, she also talks about kind of as you get to a certain age, death becomes more of a friend, and she relates to death as female. She calls her as this kind of guide that you travel with, and you actually build this kind of quite a beautiful relationship because that fear and anxiety is gone. And it just made me think kind of what Raymond was saying as well, that actually there is something not to be feared in that kind of thing as well, if you can embrace it. So it's just a quick comment, but thank you.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah, I've heard of the book, but I haven't read it, so I'll have to put it on my list.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, well, that for me, I mean, like I said, I didn't share in this talk or in the readings as much about the loss aspect, but I think there is more of that in the book, and there is certainly more of it in the writing and in my dissertation especially. But that idea of sort of death as a companion and death as a great teacher is really a theme that has followed me through a lot of these things. And while I was writing this book and in the publishing process, I had 6 different dear friends and family members pass away. So there's a lot of death in the background of all of it. And it really, as sad and as difficult as all of that is, I wouldn't trade it for anything because of the times that I spent with all of them and the memories that we have and all of that. So there is something to be said about all of these different connections of uncertainty and loss. And even in the face of ultimate loss, the possibility of connection and memory and all of these beautiful gifts that we still have. So
I mean, I'm telling you, there's nothing, I've never read a book like this before. This is a really very unique thesis turned book. There's so much feeling in everything you say here, Sarah. There's so much compassion. It's not a book about things. It is it is a book that encapsulates many things. It encapsulates spirit. It encapsulates so many amazing things that not only we should know, that we should also connect with. It's very beautifully written. I love your style, Sarah. I love your creativity. I love the images that are in it. So again, I cannot recommend it enough. And thank you so much for sharing this wonderful treat with us today. And you know, Sarah will be back. Sarah is always here. So, which is why we love Site Creative. So thank you again. And Sarah has a poem to read for us after the mini break. So we will have a 5-minute break. So we'll be back at 8:30 London time. And then Sarah, Gottfried, Raymond, and if Hetty is back, and perhaps I would also read a poem too, one that is very synchronistic to what you were saying, Sarah. So let's take a 5-minute stretch and come back.
Thank you all.
Hello. Hey, Sarah. So, Sarah, we're going to let you go first today.
All right.
And then Gottfried and Ray. And then hopefully if Hetty is back, she can go next. If not, then I'll jump in.
Hopefully you. It's not a competition, but it was one of the best we've ever had.
Oh,
Really,
Thank you so much.
mean, yes,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Sarah,
much.
thank you.
this is really amazing. And the book is just unlike any other.
I certainly plan to get it.
Thank you. Well, that's certainly high praise because we've had amazing ones. We always have amazing ones.
Thank you.
Oh.
Oh, Ray is here. All right. And then, so we'll just wait for everybody else to trickle in. But if you feel like starting,
Yeah,
Sarah, you
do.
might as well.
So this is, I just wanted to read this poem that's that's the epilogue of the book. And I'll read the little intro to it. So, in the spirit of creativity and wonder, I've included a handful of images throughout this text which helped me process and imagine a way forward as I was researching and writing. This was done in my own nascent version of Jungian arts-based research, inspired by Susan Rowland and Joel Weishaus. When I was laying out the chapter titles, I wanted them to provoke emotion and be symbolic in the way lines of a poem would be. Once they were all in place and I felt they were representative of each section, I began adding them together in a play on a pen-tomb poem. I would like to share that here as a final note, an antidote to the long prose above and a pause before the reader moves on. A moment of wonder as you wander forward onto your own path in these ever-changing climates. So, climates of uncertainty, ambiguity, and loss. Navigating doom into an uncertain future, entangled in viscous tides. Shadows of green shroud fires of change, tears from the melting ice. Entangled in viscous tides, coral, reflecting. In a world of blood and bones, tears from the melting ice. Buoy one another, connecting across rising tides. Coral, reflecting in a world of blood and bones, shadows of green, shroud fires of change. Buoying one another, connecting across rising tides, navigating doom into an uncertain future.
It's beautiful imagery, Sarah. Oh, and Hetty is here. We can see Hetty's back, which is amazing. So thank you, Sarah, for sharing with us your lovely poetic work. And, you know, the images are, you have a way of stirring images in our minds, whether it's through writing a poem or writing a thesis or through capturing them with your lenses. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
And next up, Gottfried.
Thank you. Slave ships. I feel sickened, haunted by the nightmare. Daily, refugees are drowning in the Channel or the Mediterranean on their way to the very country that I live in. Comfortably so, I almost am ashamed to say. 2. Can there be poetry? Can there be any form expressing that? Is there not to be poetry after Auschwitz, as a philosopher once claimed? Or could it be that only poetry or other forms of art are the only way to voice what is unspeakable? 3. William Turner, called earlier this year our contemporary, did just that. Portrayed mass murder of the damned, the wretched of the earth in 1840. He painted what today indeed is happening contemporarily, as in day to day. Slavers, that's the title, Slavers turning overboard the dead and dying, based on an historical event in 1781 when 130 living enslaved ones were, for convenience and of course for greater profit, jettisoned as cargo in the language of the time. And you can see those drowning clearly in the painting's foreground. Of course, today their limbs gesticulating as they drown no longer are in chains as those in Turner's painting, but that's the only difference. Today, those who drown daily are the descendants of the ones who did survive the massacre, as well as those colonized. Oh, one other change. The perpetrators now provide unsafe vessels for the crossings where the victims do the drownings left on their own. Otherwise, same old, same old. 4. As an all too easy solution is at hand, a free ferry service to land the refugees that tried to reach where then they could be processed, read their official status. Ethically, I only can assume that those perpetrators, ruthless criminals, as our government calls them, must underhand be operating yet with official sanction, just as the captain and his crew of yesteryear. In other words, they are doing the dirty work of those who govern us. Interlude. Having worked now for some 50 years in this country as a psychotherapist and analyst, with some hundreds of people, how many of those do you think have considered the involvement of their forebears with colonization and or enslavement, as well as all the other forms of empire building? Just 2, both of them women. One's forefather helped to subdue the Maoris in Aotearoa. The other's family ran a sugar plantation in the Caribbean. More times than not in my work, I have of course brought out my country's, Germany's Nazi past, as every past is always with us in the room. On occasions, I've also been confronted with it, and I and the other have worked with that in mutuality. However, and here it's getting really complicated, no, I do not see myself as shirking that part of my country's shame that's mine. However, there were times when it seemed much easier for the person I was working with to focus on that, rather to engage with their own country's shameful past and how its impact is continuing all around us each and every day. 5. Of course, no life can be measured in monetary terms. However, money may just give an indication of the immensity of what we are facing. Last year, the International Court of Justice suggested Britain should pay reparations of an estimated 18.8 trillion pounds to the descendants of those enslaved. 6. SOS stands for Save Our Souls.
Thank you, Gottfried.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I love how you reflect. I love how you articulate the voice of the world and so many voices around the world today.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, there's so much ugliness going around, but hopefully, we can all wait it out, as Sarah says in a way.
As Sarah says, yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, Ray.
Yes. You can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, first I just want to say to Sarah, the tears from the melting ice, that was a great image. But those tears, I see them eventually flowing downstream and helping things to grow. So there's a relationship there between bringing new life in. So thank you for that. As the synchronicities usually go, when I come on to the site, I'm taking a class in Russian fiction, and I just wrote a paper called about 2 weeks ago called "The Uncertainty Principle." And in science, it weaves together a lot of things, but in science, certainly is the quest for certainty. Yet, when quantum physics comes along 100 years ago, what we realize is that at the quantum level, it's just the opposite of what we see on the everyday level of our senses, that there is no certainty at all. And Heisenberg, in his famous uncertainty principle, discovered or brought forth the fact that if in the quantum level, if you can only figure out either the position or the momentum of a particle, you cannot figure out both at the same time. So we're all made of quantum particles, and certainty is what is at the core. And to bring it from science back to poetry, I just read a sentence from the paper. In a famous letter, English Romantic poet John Keats defined negative capability as, quote, when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without irritably reaching after fact and reason. So I love the word irritably there. And another anecdote from the paper, which comes from my poetry teacher. In the course of writing poetry at the Breadloaf School of English, Paul Muldoon once said, when you are writing, you have no idea what you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing, but you really have no idea what you're doing when you're writing. It took me a long time to understand what he meant by that, but I'll leave you with that. So, and I don't know whether I've read these before, but this poem has 3 parts, and it's called Momentary Stay Against, and it comes from Robert Frost, who said a poem is a momentary stay against confusion. Momentary stay against. 1. The poem is a lute, each word a note, longing to be heard. The poet and the musician play against confusion, create melody from silence. The muse plays the heart like a harp. The poet must listen to a harmony no one else can hear. 2, learn to play new melodies from the same notes heard 1,000 years ago. Learn to make new words from the ancient tales no one remembers. 3, all ways lead to the still center where you find nothing at all. Yet everything arises from this silence between the notes of a song, between the words of a poem. Always the eternal abides. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Raymond.
Thank you.
Again, the whole idea of the momentary stay against confusion and the idea of possibilities within uncertainties and the idea that the poem is another beautiful space to hold this small flame of hope. Thank you for sharing it with us. And Hedy, your turn.
I have two short dreams, two short poems. The first one was recently in Cider Press Review, so since it's recorded, I had to mention that. And it's titled Dream with Art Teacher. 2 nights ago, as I walked at dusk in my front yard by the low brick wall flanked by 2 Chinese lanterns, my art teacher appeared, holding salmon-colored branches he arranged against the brick wall in a zigzag, then triangular shape, reminding me that the larger ones should stand apart. He aligned smaller ones in succession in his freestyle ink brush painting. This is the ideal composition, he said. Avoid symmetry and let air flow between the lines, the way a painting breathes with hidden meanings. Suddenly, the nude figure of a young woman emerged to my right, seen from the back. She slightly turned her face, and I could see her profile. As night fell, her body glowed like an opaline Lalique sculpture. I woke up thinking that I had to start painting again. And the next poem, so we were taken from many serious issues, from slavery and immigration and disasters, through music, thanks to Ray, music and poetry, and uncertainties. And this poem is continuing with the theme of painting in the dreams. And the title, and this one was published a few months ago by Gargoyle. It's titled Entrapment Within a Douanier Rousseau Painting. And of course, Gottfried talked about Turner, so this is a kind of synchronicity in a way. Everything ties in together with some of the echoes of Sarah's presentation. Entrapment within a Douanier Rousseau painting. My dream is unlike your lovers, Jadwiga, who lay naked on a sofa in midst of the jungle, staring at a couple of tame lions, listening to the sound of the flute of a snake charmer. In this, your last painting, titled The Dream, she offers the tapestry of her skin to the lush foliage, as the feline's golden eyes reflect the light in your gaze and hers. Her posture, unlike Goya's naked Majas, nonchalant recline, is tense and well aware of the voyeuristic glances hiding beneath every heavy branch. She points at a mysterious onlooker that even you can't capture on the canvas. As for me, let me tell you about the pressure in my chest as I doze off, half conscious of an imminent danger lurking outside the house. With eyes closed, I see wild beasts, lions shaking majestic manes, and tigers advancing stealthily around the house. I know I'm trapped inside. The darkness enabling me to peek at the way these creatures prey in slow motion behind overgrown ferns and spiderwebs, sword-like leaves rising taller by the minute. But I'm the only one aware of such an aberrant presence, since I'm home alone and won't dare move or open any door. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Hetty. So beautiful. And I mean, synchronistically, in your first poem, in one of the verses, you said, avoid symmetry. And again, this connects us to the whole theme of uncertainty here, because symmetry is somehow linked to certainty and predictability. So thank you. Thank you once again for another poem that celebrates uncertainty. I would like to read something in now as well. And this is from my older collection, Simply Being, and it's called The White in the Waiting. And as I told you earlier, Sarah, it felt a bit synchronous because you were talking about waiting, and you were also showing all those images of ice, and then the connection between ice and waiting and the good that it can bring. So this book was a pandemic baby, so it was written, the majority of it was written during lockdown. And this again, of course, I mean, all we had to do was wait it out. And there were so many poems that came out of this theme and out of waiting in general. And this is written after Emily Dickinson's Hope is the Thing with Feathers. This is called The White in the Waiting. Hope is a happy haunting, a sneaky, friendly ghost, colorless, alabaster at best. That invisible wind behind the sails, motor, mover, and fuel might feel like a fairy's kiss, a pinch of pixie dust, or a genie hatching through a lamp's cervix. The horizon blushes bashfully with the setting sun's pink promise of tomorrow, as lover's sky winks at his enamored earth, whom he'll ogle again in the morning. Hope is that thing, in every white in the waiting, not in the light, but in the patient screen that awaits it. Hope is not a thing with colors, not a door, but a pearly wall propping itself for graffiti of perhaps a door. It is an ivory cast, coiled around a broken limb, waiting for the chromatic cuneiform of loved ones' signatures. It is still that thing with feathers, though. A blanched, post-diluvian dove at the ark's door, a message of rainbows forming, an anticipation of color, an invitation to life. And with that, we all hope for hope. And we all hope to keep doing what we're doing. Thank you all for bringing so much light into not only this space, but in everything that you do. We greatly appreciate this and your time and your generous sharing of your creative works. We hope to see you with us very soon. So we do have our next free event is Indelible Evenings, and that is on the 28th of April. And it will be with Patricia Levy and some other authors from the Handbook of Arts-Based Research. We haven't announced it yet, so you were all the very first to know. And we have our next Site Creative session on the 30th of April with Dr. Danielle Lane, who will be speaking about her very new kind of AI, which is called Cora. And it is an AI of philosophy. and ancient wisdom. So this is going to be very interesting and very site creative. So that will be on Wednesday, the 30th. So pop those dates into your agendas, and we will be announcing them very soon. So hopefully by later this week or early next week, it will be on our website and social media and all other platforms that we announce on. So yeah, and have your poems ready, especially for the 30th.
Thank you for offering this space. Thank you for creating the space.
Thank you, Gottfried. You
Profoundest
all
thank you.
created. I mean, this space is created by everybody who's here, or else it couldn't exist.
Bless
So
you.
thank you all, and
Thank
have a
you.
lovely day or evening or afternoon. Enjoy it, whatever it is.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.